Welcome back to The Heat. 25 years after the end of apartheid, poverty and joblessness remain a huge issue for South Africa. With unemployment at 26%, there's been resentment and in some cases violence against African migrant workers. We continue our conversation now with Dorina Biko. She's with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies here in Washington, D.C. And from Johannesburg, we're joined by Jean-Pierre Misago. He's a researcher with the African Center for Migration and Society at the University of the Witwatersrand. Jean-Pierre, let me start with you this time. There's been a great deal of anger in African countries over the manner in which South Africa has responded to this problem of xenophobic attacks. As I mentioned, Nigeria is one country that withdrew its diplomats in protest against South Africa. But now President Jacob Zuma of South Africa will have a chance to restore that relationship with other African countries. He will be playing host this weekend to a meeting of the African Union. How high up on the agenda is this issue, and what is he going to do about it?
To be honest with you, I don't think it's very high on the agenda because even if we have seen the president apologizing to neighboring countries, it doesn't seem to be a big issue in the country because the rhetoric from the ruling party is that it's usually criminality, not xenophobia, and that has been the denialism that has kept this thing going on for too long. They discuss it in political circles, but when it comes to taking concrete measures at national level, we don't see anything happening. Once again, I fear this is just a political rhetoric and nothing really on the ground to tackle the issue. And quickly, one thing I would like to say is that xenophobia is not unique to South Africa. Even in our neighboring countries, xenophobia as an attitude is a reality. What is worrying in South Africa is that more and more people are willing to express their attitudes through violence. And people want to address xenophobic violence need to understand the factors that are involved in the pathways from attitudes to violence. And until we understand those factors, we never be able to resolve the issue of the violence, because you can't force people to love one another. That's what people feel. But the problem, it becomes a problem when they start acting on those feelings, and then by acting, they violate other people's rights. It's the behavior that is more concerning than attitudes. You need to understand what is behind the behavior.
Dorina, as Jean-Pierre points out, this will not be high up on the agenda at this African Union summit. Is it in some respects a missed opportunity for South Africa to restore the relationship, to address this problem in some meaningful way?
You can look at it that way, that it is a missed opportunity, because you are hosting all of these African nations. And the neighboring countries in particular have really sort of suffered with the backlash against their nationals in South Africa. So I would look at it as a missed opportunity to restore sort of regional relations.
Jean-Pierre, looking at neighboring countries, the countries around South Africa, should South Africa actually bear some responsibility for the welfare of these migrant workers who are entering their countries? After all, many of these countries actually hosted exiles during the apartheid years and at great risk. So doesn't South Africa owe them something?
This is something that's talked about. You have to treat other African brothers because they helped us during the apartheid. But for me, that would be a very wrong approach. It's not about paying back. What about migrants coming from other countries that did not support ANC or the struggle for liberation? How about migrants coming from European or American countries? Does it mean that they have to be treated differently? For me, the approach is to protect the human rights of everyone. It shouldn't be about paying back. And by the way, the idea that it's Afrophobia, it's only African migrants attacked, that's not true. Because we have Bangladeshis and the Pakistanis who are also the Chinese who are attacked. So the Afrophobia hypothesis does not pass the empirical test. So it's okay if there was some kind of solidarity and cooperation with countries that helped, but it doesn't mean it's payback, and doesn't mean those people coming from other countries should be treated differently. So it should be rule of law and human rights for everyone, for me.
What is your feeling, Dorina? Does South Africa owe neighboring countries something?
I agree with Jean-Pierre. You know, I think what's owed is security for those within your borders, whether or not they actively supported the ANC while it was in exile or not. And, you know, right now, the migrants in South Africa fear for their safety, so they don't have that, you know, guarantee. And I think that should be the sort of bar rather than, you know, whether or not they were supportive of the ANC struggle.
Right, and speaking of the ANC, of course, they were the main party who was in opposition to the apartheid government in South Africa, the Party of Liberation, as they were known then, as they are known now. Is this hurting the ANC politically in South Africa?
I think it's one of many perceptions that is hurting the ANC. We saw that in, you know, the last year's election, about how the ANC seems to have moved away from its roots as sort of protecting workers. And this is sort of just one more example sort of piling on to this negative image that the ANC has.
Right. Well, joining us now from Johannesburg is Sarah Motha. She is a program manager with the Foundation for Human Rights. Sarah, thanks for joining us. We've been talking about these xenophobic attacks in South Africa and the South African government's response to it. In some respects, the South African government has gone on the offensive. We hear of raids being launched against some immigrant communities. There's something known as Operation Fila, where foreigners have been targeted in worker hostels as well as in informal settlements. What can you tell us about these raids, and have these workers' human rights been violated?
Thank you for having us. Certainly, Operation Fila has contributed to a gross violation of rights for migrants and refugees, in particular their right to privacy and the indiscriminate arrest that occurred during the carrying out of Operation Fila.
This latest round of violence against immigrant communities has been blamed to some extent on the Zulu monarch, King Goodwill Zwelithini, a very influential monarch in South Africa. He wields a lot of influence and power. He said that foreigners should pack their bags and leave, and his supporters, his followers, took that as meaning that they should go on the attack against foreigners. Has he been saying any more about this? Has he apologized for what he said? Has he withdrawn the statement that he made?
You know, irresponsible political statements certainly do contribute or do perpetuate a certain negative stereotype that eventually contributes to a broader, you know, negative perception against migrants and refugees. And I think on that we need, you know, political leadership that is, you know, operating within the framework of rights as enshrined in the South African Constitution, which is rights of everyone to be respected, their fundamental rights, irrespective of the legal status.
Dorina, looking at the bigger picture here and the manner in which this problem should be tackled, I want you to take a listen to what Graça Machel, the widow of Nelson Mandela, had to say a short while ago. Let's watch this.
Those 5 million of foreigners who are in South Africa are being pushed to the limit to come here. That's why they come to sell cigarettes. That's why some of them, they come to open this small business. The Somalis, the Ethiopians, etc., etc. Why? Because we, the liberation movement, in power now, we lost the dream. We lost the vision.
So, Dorina, is she saying, in effect, that African leaders have failed some parts of their population? They failed to provide opportunities for people where people could stay in their own countries. They wouldn't have to be forced, as she puts it, to go into other countries to open small businesses, to try and eke out a living there.
I think so. I mean, and we see that not just flowing to South Africa, but of course flowing to Europe now. You know, why would somebody assume these great risks, whether it's crossing the sea or moving to a country where they might, you know, risk being caught up in sort of some mob violence? And it is because, you know, the calculation is I might have a better chance in South Africa than I do at home to provide for my family. And that type of, that malaise we see in many parts of the continent, especially the youth group. You know, Africa has a very young population,
Right.
and they're not getting the opportunities that they feel they deserve.
Yeah. Sarah, we heard earlier on from our correspondent in Johannesburg that the South African government is taking this issue very seriously. They've set up a parliamentary committee which is looking into the problem of xenophobic violence and how to address it, I guess, in the longer term. Do you detect some hope there that this problem will be tackled, that the South African government will do something about the problem they have?
Certainly a sustained approach to deal with xenophobia is required to roll back xenophobia. And I think it's a collective responsibility between government, civil society organizations, business, individuals, you know, faith-based organizations to take a stand and work together to combat xenophobia in South Africa.
Jean-Pierre, is it perhaps time for the African Union to take the initiative right now, to be more vocal about this problem, to have a concerted solution, to come up with a plan?
I think so. As I said before, it's not only a South African problem, because we have had migrants also chased away from many other countries in DRC, in Tanzania, in Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire. So it has happened before in other countries as well. So this is the time to really look at what can be done collectively to resolve the issue. And in terms of these local solutions, the parliamentary task team and the others, this is something you have seen in the past. It hasn't really yielded any positive results. So what I see this as just some kind of symbolic responses to appease the anger from the international community, but they will fade away a few months along the line, like they did in 2008. So I don't see this as something that's going to be sustainable to provide solutions to resolve the issue once for all.